Welcome to The Lion's Share, the podcast where family, faith, football, finance, and fun come together. Join Mitch Lyons, former NFL player turned financial pro, as he shares insights and stories from his unique journey. From navigating the financial playbook to celebrating life's touchdowns, this podcast is all about living a balanced and fulfilling life. So buckle up your chin strap, say your prayers, and let's dive into the game plan for a prosperous future both on and off the field.
And welcome back to The Lion's Share, where we talk family, faith, football, finance, and fun. I'm your host, Mitch Lyons. And in today's episode, we're continuing our leadership series regarding NFL coaches, leadership lessons that I learned over the period of my 7-year career. And in the past episodes, we've touched on head coaches Jerry Glanville, June Jones, Bill Cowher, my tight end coach in Pittsburgh, Mike Mularkey, who later went on to coach for the Bills, Titans, and Jaguars. Today, I'm going to touch on a guy that maybe a lot of NFL fans may not be that familiar with, but a guy that is an absolute legend in NFL circles, Frank Gansz Sr. Frank was a longtime coach in the league, coached over 40 or almost 40 years. Was a head coach for a short period of time in 87 and 88 for the Kansas City Chiefs, but really hung his hat over the course of his career on being one of the elite special teams coaches. And Frank came to Atlanta my second year after Jerry Glanville had gotten fired. June Jones took over, and June hired Frank. But Frank would only come to Atlanta on one condition, and his condition was that he could have an hour meeting with the entire team every morning to start the day. For those of you not familiar with NFL protocol, that is very rare. No special teams coach is getting an hour every day, and much less having the entire team sit in on the meeting, because your superstars that aren't playing on special teams, they don't want to sit there for an hour for no reason. But the reason Frank wanted that and why he thought it was important was he wanted all of us to be speaking the same language. He wanted us all to recognize exactly what we were doing by just maybe saying a word or two or maybe one phrase, so that we would all be speaking the same language and be more efficient as a team. And, like I said, that didn't set well with guys that maybe never saw special teams, right? And one guy that comes to mind is Mike Ken. He was a longtime left tackle for the Atlanta Falcons. Good dude, highly respected, but he had no interest in sitting in on Frank's meetings. And he kind of he held off on attending those for quite a bit. And it really, really irritated Frank. But I don't think June... at this time, Mike was about as old as June Jones, and they knew each other. And in fact, I think June played with Mike back in Atlanta early in Mike's career. So there was one time when we were in the special teams meeting, and Frank, knew that Mike hadn't been attending, and he knew he was in the weight room through the wall, right? And in the middle of the meeting, he just goes off and says, "Hello, can you hear me?" And he was specifically yelling at Mike Ken, but just to express his dissatisfaction and his anger that he wasn't following the protocol that everyone else was doing by being in that meeting. But Frank was a stickler for that kind of thing. But also, the guy was an absolute history buff, and he often stated the phrase, "Those who fail to study history are doomed to repeat it." And he would say that a lot. In fact, a lot of these quotes he said repeatedly, so that we would all know them and we'd be speaking the same language. So he would tell these kinds of stories. And Frank had been a jet fighter pilot earlier in his life. And he often referred to, the NFL being the high performance industry, much like being a jet fighter pilot is. There's not a lot of room for error, right? And the slightest error of one jet fighter pilot can completely screw up the squadron of fighters. Just like, one man out of 11 on a field anytime screws up and doesn't do his job, it blows the whole play up and the whole team suffers. So he spoke a lot about the high performance industry and being true to your teammates and being all in. And, another quote he'd always say is, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act but a habit," which is a quote from Aristotle. But he said it all the time, and because he was a big believer in repetition and doing things perfectly and repping it until you can't get it wrong. And so he was big on that. But, it could at times be very intense. And one funny story that comes to mind. It was my last year in Atlanta, and we were in the midst of a 3-13 season. Frank was beyond frustrated, like a lot of us were, and we had a really ugly game. I believe it was out in L.A. when we got beat like 56-17 or something. Like it was just a bloodletting, and we didn't do anything right. So everyone was a little tight that next week. Coaching staff knew they were probably getting fired, and so there's a lot of tension the entire week of the game. And Frank was very, very tense all week and uptight and expressing that to people. And he every Saturday night before a game, he would have a special teams meeting, and for that particular meeting, he wanted everybody to be able to stand up, and he used the kickoff return team as an example. He wanted everyone to stand up and tell the team not only what your job was, but what the job of every other man on that field was for that particular play call. So it was very tense. So we knew this was coming, so everyone did their prep time, and I was on kickoff return. So, my job, I line up at, left position in the wedge, and I'm going to drop back 10 yards, and I'm going to identify, L2 coming down the field, and I'm going to push him outside the numbers so that the running back or the kick returner can come up through the hole. And, meanwhile, this teammate's doing this, and this teammate's doing that. And every person's doing this. And he's gone through about 10 of the guys, and the final guy to say his piece is a long-time NFL veteran, Rich Miano, and Rich knew this was his last year. He was done with his NFL career after this year. It was just 1 year. He had signed with Atlanta and was going to finish it up and move back to Hawaii and enjoy life. So Rich goes through this whole thing. Keep in mind, this is 1996, so this is a couple years after the whole OJ trial and everything. And he goes through in great detail every single thing that everybody on the field is going to do. And he says, at the end of the day, guys, he goes, we have to come together like fingers in a glove. But if the glove doesn't fit, we must have quit. And the tension in the room just left like you popped a balloon, and everybody just erupted in laughter. And Frank, don't think it was all that happy about it, but he did crack a smile. But it was hilarious, and it brought the whole team down. But Rich, he was pretty funny dude, and that just in the moment, as tense as it just was probably good to pop the tension a little bit here before the game. But that one is one that it sticks out in my mind. But anyway. Just was a guy. Frank was just a guy that was consistent every day. He'd greet you with, "Hey, my good man." He'd always say, "Hey, my good man." And really, I think of quotes and I think of history lessons that he provided every day in those meetings. And we kept a notebook. He mandated that you kept notes and could review back to them. I remember one story he told about an African tribe that when they heard the snap of a bowstring, they would duck. They'd know to duck because somebody was shooting at them. So Frank developed this little game where he would snap his hands, clap his hands, and the next move he'd do is slapping his chest. So he'd go, and that if you didn't have your head ducked by the time he clapped and hit his chest, and you heard the thud of his chest, you were dead, and he wanted us to react. He wanted us not to be able to have to think, but he wanted us to just react. So that was an example he'd use. And, if you thought you were maybe dozing off a little bit in the meeting and whatnot, he would use that in order to get people's attention and make sure everyone was on the same page. So just a guy that I really had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with, and really was a great guy, and really shaped me as far as attention to detail. And with Frank, it wasn't just attention to detail; it was painstaking attention to detail. That was just a phrase he said all the time: painstaking attention to detail. And if you go to any man that played for Frank Gansz, they would all tell the same stories. And nothing illustrated that more than when Frank tragically passed in 2009. He went in to have a knee replacement and had a blood clot situation, and he died on the table at age 70. And when I heard that, it was just it was a gut punch, because it was a guy that I spent 3 years with and a lot of time with. And I spent time later on, and I went back and watched his funeral service at the Naval Academy where it was held. And there must have been 25 different guys that came up, spanning from, early in his career through the time I was in Atlanta. And then even later, he coached in college, I believe at Baylor or somewhere in Texas. It might have even been, I know June later coached somewhere down there. It might have been for June. I forget. SMU, I think June went to. So I think Frank coached with them there. But even had a punter, from like the 2008 or 2009 season that was there that had played under Frank. And every guy, from this young kid that was a punter at SMU to the NFL's all-time kicker, all-time leading scorer at the time, Morton Anderson, who played with me in Atlanta. All of these guys told the same stories and said the same things because they all spoke the same language, because Frank was consistent. And for nearly 40 years, he was preaching the same message, and everybody that ever been exposed to him knew those same phrases, knew the same stories, and it was just really neat to see that as they honored him. And every man could you could tell the impression that Frank had not only in his life, but really in anybody's life that person came in contact with going forward. Because my kids have heard these phrases and the same quotes and whatnot for their entire lifetimes, just because it's a fabric of who I am because of the time Frank poured into my life. So great dude, Frank Gansz Sr. His coach is his son also by the name of Frank Gansz, who's also a longtime coach in college as well. But great man, and just one of those guys that was just a leader, and you respected him. You had to, because he was consistent and he did it the right way. And so that's the latest one in the episode of Coaching Leadership Lessons. But the one thing I got from Frank that stands out the most was just painstaking attention to detail and doing it right so many times that you can't get it wrong, and holding yourself to a high standard because it's the high performance industry. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please like it, subscribe to our channel, to our podcast, and we'll get alerted when we come out with new ones. But I appreciate it. You can also go to Mitch Lyons Wealth and follow any of our mediums on social media there, and check us out on YouTube as well for lots of videos regarding finance and whatnot. Or you can go to the Lyons Share YouTube page as well. But feel free to follow us, check us out, and until next time, take care and God bless.
Thank you for joining another episode of The Lyons Share. We hope you found value in our discussions on family, faith, football, finance, and fun. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review if you enjoyed the show. Connect with Mitch on all social media platforms at MitchLyonsWealth.com. Until next time, remember to protect your wealth, cherish your loved ones, and live life to the fullest.